Welcome to Audiobook 365 Stories.
Mr. Hindley came home for the funeral, and something that surprised us and made the neighbors talk a lot was that he brought a wife with him. He never told us anything about who she was or where she was from. Maybe she had no money or important family, or he wouldn't have kept his marriage a secret from his father. She wasn't the kind of person who caused problems in the house. Everything she saw, as soon as she came in, seemed to make her happy. Everything that happened around her made her smile, except when they were getting ready for the funeral and when the mourners came. I thought she was a bit foolish because of how she acted during the funeral. She ran to her room and made me go with her, even though I should have been dressing the children. She sat there, shaking and holding her hands together, asking again and again, "Have they gone yet?" Then she started talking in a crazy way about how seeing black clothes made her feel. She jumped, shook, and then started crying. When I asked her what was wrong, she said she didn't know, but she was very scared of dying. I didn't think she would die at all. She was quite thin, but young, with fresh skin, and her eyes were bright like diamonds. I did notice that going upstairs made her breathe very fast, and that even a little noise made her shake. She also coughed a lot, but I didn't understand what these things meant and didn't feel sorry for her. We don't usually like people from other places here, Mr. Lockwood, unless they like us first. Young Earnshaw had changed a lot in the 3 years he was away. He had become thinner, his skin was pale, and he spoke and dressed very differently. On the day he returned, he told Joseph and me that we had to live in the back kitchen from now on and leave the house to him. He was going to cover a small spare room with carpet and paper to make a new living room, but his wife was so happy with the white floor, the big, warm fireplace, the shiny dishes, the cupboard, and the doghouse, and the big space to move around in where they usually sat, that he thought it wasn't needed for her comfort, so he forgot the idea. She was also happy to have a sister in her new family. She talked a lot to Catherine, kissed her, ran around with her, and gave her many presents at first. But her love didn't last long. When she became grumpy, Hindley became cruel. A few words from her showing she didn't like Heathcliff were enough to make Hindley hate the boy again. He pushed Heathcliff away from their group and made him stay with the servants. He stopped him from learning from the priest and forced him to work outside instead, making him work as hard as any other boy on the farm. At first, Heathcliff accepted his lower position pretty well because Kathy taught him everything she learned and worked or played with him in the fields. They both seemed like they would grow up wild, like people who lived far away from others. The young master didn't care at all about how they behaved or what they did, as long as they stayed away from him. He didn't even make sure they went to church on Sundays. It was only when Joseph and the priest scolded him for being careless when they missed church that he remembered to punish Heathcliff with a beating and Catherine by not letting her eat dinner or supper. But one of Heathcliff and Catherine's favorite things to do was run away to the moors in the morning and stay there all day. After that, any punishment became something they laughed about. The priest could make Catherine learn as many Bible chapters as he wanted, and Joseph could beat Heathcliff until his arm hurt, but they forgot everything as soon as they were together again. At least, they forgot as soon as they thought of some naughty plan to get back at others. One Sunday evening, they were sent away from the sitting room because they were making noise or doing something small like that. When I went to call them for supper, I couldn't find them anywhere. We searched the house from top to bottom, and we searched the yard and the stables, but they were nowhere to be seen. At last, Hindley got very angry and told us to lock the doors, and he swore that nobody would let them in that night. Everyone in the house went to bed, but I was too worried to sleep. I opened the window and listened, even though it was raining. I was ready to let them in, even though I wasn't supposed to, if they came back. After a while, I heard footsteps coming up the road, and I saw the light of a lantern shining through the gate. I quickly put a shawl over my head and ran out to stop them from waking Mr. Earnshaw by knocking on the door. But there was Heathcliff all by himself. I was surprised to see him alone. "Where is Miss Catherine?" I cried quickly. "I hope nothing bad has happened?" "She's at Thrushcross Grange," he answered, and I would have been there too, but they were rude and didn't invite me to stay. "Well, you're in trouble now," I said. "You'll never be happy until you get sent away for good." "Why in the world did you go wandering to Thrushcross Grange?" "Let me take off my wet clothes, and I'll tell you everything, Nellie," he replied. I told him to be careful not to wake the master, and while he undressed and I waited to put out the candle, he continued, "Kathy and I snuck out of the wash house to go wander around freely, and when we saw the lights at the Grange, we thought we'd just go and see if the Lintons spent their Sunday nights standing cold in the corners while their father and mother ate, drank, sang, laughed, and stared into the fire until their eyes hurt. Do you think they do that? Or maybe they read sermons, answer questions from their servant about the Bible, and learn a list of names from the scriptures if they don't answer correctly." "Probably not," I replied. "They are good children, no doubt, and don't deserve the way you're treated because of your bad behavior." "Don't preach to me, Nellie," he said. "Nonsense." We ran from the top of the heights to the park without stopping. Catherine lost the race because she was barefoot. "You'll have to go find her shoes in the mud tomorrow." We crawled through a broken hedge, felt our way up the path, and stood on a flower bed under the drawing room window. The light was coming from there. They hadn't closed the shutters, and the curtains were only half closed. Both of us could look inside by standing on the basement and holding onto the ledge, and we saw, it was beautiful, a wonderful room with a red carpet, red-covered chairs and tables, and a white ceiling with a gold border. Old Mr. and Mrs. Linton weren't there. Edgar and his sister had the whole room to themselves. Shouldn't they have been happy? We would have thought we were in heaven. And now, guess what your good children were doing? Isabella, I think she's 11, a year younger than Kathy, was lying at the far end of the room, screaming like someone was hurting her. Edgar was standing by the fireplace, crying quietly, and in the middle of the table, there was a little dog shaking its paw and whining. From their arguing, we understood that they had nearly pulled the poor dog apart while fighting over who would hold it. We laughed out loud at the spoiled children. We really thought they were foolish. When would you ever catch me wanting what Catherine wanted? Or find us fighting, crying, and rolling on the ground like that, divided by the whole room? I wouldn't trade my life here for 1,000 lives like Edgar Linton's at Thrushcross Grange. What careless behavior from her brother, exclaimed Mr. Linton, turning from me to Catherine. I've heard from Shielders, that was the priest, sir, that he lets her grow up without any proper teachings. But who is this? Where did she find this companion? Oh! I see. He's that strange boy my old neighbor brought back from his trip to Liverpool, a little Lascar, or maybe an American or Spanish castaway. A wicked boy, for sure, said the old lady, and not fit for a respectable house. Did you hear his language, Linton? I'm shocked that my children had to listen to it. I started cursing again. Don't be mad, Nellie, and Robert was told to take me away. I refused to go without Kathy, so he dragged me into the garden, handed me the lantern, told me that Mr. Earnshaw would hear about my bad behavior, and told me to leave immediately. Then he locked the door again. The curtains were still open at one corner, and I went back to spy on them. If Catherine had wanted to come back, I was ready to break their big glass windows into 1,000,000 pieces unless they let her go. But she was sitting quietly on the sofa. Mrs. Linton took off the gray cloak that Kathy had borrowed for our little trip, shaking her head and probably telling her off. They treated her like a lady, and they didn't treat me the same way. Then a servant brought a bowl of warm water and washed her feet. Mr. Linton mixed a drink for her, and Isabella gave her a plate full of cakes. Edgar stood far away, just staring. After that, they dried and brushed her beautiful hair, gave her a big pair of slippers, and wheeled her over to the fire. I left her, sitting happily, sharing her food with the little dog and Skulker, even pinching the dog's nose while he ate. She brought some life into the boring Lintons. Their dull blue eyes lit up a little, reflecting her bright, lovely face. I could see they were amazed by her. She is so much better than them, better than everyone in the world, isn't she, Nellie? There's going to be more trouble from this than you think, I replied, covering him up and putting out the light. You're hopeless. Heathcliff and Mr. Hindley will have to take serious action soon, you'll see. My words were more true than I wished. This unlucky adventure made Earnshaw really angry. And then Mr. Linton, trying to fix things, came to visit us the next day. He gave the young master a strong lecture on how he was raising his family, and it made Hindley finally start paying attention. Heathcliff wasn't beaten, but he was told that if he spoke to Miss Catherine again, he would be thrown out. Mrs. Earnshaw also promised to keep her sister-in-law under control when she returned home, using gentle methods instead of force, because force would never work with her.